Welcome, everybody. It's great to see such a nice crowd from all over Pinellas County, from one end to the other.
And
Thank you
Hillsborough.
so much. And Hillsborough. Oh,
People
welcome,
cross the
welcome,
bridge.
welcome to Tarpon Springs. I see you got your passports out to cross over the Overton Road and the bridge. I'm Christine Rank Carter. I'm the curator for the Libra Raptner Museum of Art at St. Petersburg College. And as of Friday, I am now the newly appointed executive director. I am really, really excited to have you all here today. We've worked really hard on this exhibition with Carol Mickett and Robert Stackhouse, and we're so excited to debut them to our community here in Tarpon Springs. I do have a little bit of a lengthy intro because they're just so amazing and they've done so much. So I hope you'll bear with me for a second while I read off of some comments and kind of give you an overview of the exhibition. So this year, as you all might know, the Raptner Museum of Art celebrates its 20th anniversary of serving the community with a series of exhibitions that highlight the museum's major collections of masterworks, Florida artists, and its award-winning architecture, which you'll learn more about this fall. This summer, we're honored to present exhibitions that focus on Florida's celebrated artists and our most precious resource, water. Balance of Water highlights contemporary artists Carol Mickett and Robert Stackhouse, whose collaborative work raises awareness of the effects of climate change on our waterways. Since relocating from St. Petersburg to Tarpon Springs in 2017, Mickett and Stackhouse unveiled their work to their recently adopted community for its first time. Balance of Water, Carol Mickett and Robert Stackhouse explores the unseen forces in nature that keep our planet in check and envisions what could happen when imbalance pushes it to the brink. By examining the current state of our waters, Mickett and Stackhouse have created a forum for dialogue where art and science converge. Their monumental paintings push the conversation of climate change in new directions in a visually poetic way that is all-encompassing yet intimate in feeling. The visitor's journey through the exhibitions mirrors the flow of the Gulf Stream. This is a prominent theme in their work. If you haven't seen the exhibition already, you're going to learn more about it in a minute. The journey continues through the supporting exhibition, Florida's Waterways, Homage to Tarpon Springs, with works focused on our surrounding waters by local artists Christopher Still, Bill Rank, Alan Lipa, and others. Artwork throughout is accompanied by educational text and QR codes to encourage scientific inquiry. Central to the exhibitions is a gallery in the round where the exterior walls reveal the consequences of this climate crisis. In contrast, the interior gallery space offers a safe haven where Mickett and Stackhouse's pristine tidal paintings are a place for reflection. Carol Mickett and Robert Stackhouse have been making art collaboratively for over 22 years, and their work reaches far beyond the boundaries of visual art. Their interdisciplinary approach combines ancient history and philosophical concepts with the art of today. Through painting, printmaking, sculptural installations, and performance-based works, they have cultivated a unique language of art that directly engages the viewer in an intimate experience. Much of their work focuses on water and water-related issues. Today, we are going to see some of their major works from around the country and highlights from this exhibition we have in our galleries. They each bring the collaboration with a rich background that includes international exhibitions, academia, publications, and multidisciplinary collaborations. I want to point out that some of their collaborators are in the group today, so I hope that you get a chance to talk with them later. Now, just to give you a little bit of a background about what each of them bring to the table, Carol Mickett holds her PhD in philosophy from the University of Minnesota and worked for over a decade in academia. She also studied at Princeton University, University of California, Los Angeles, New York University, and the University of New Hampshire, where she was a member of Phi Beta Kappa and graduated summa cum laude. Mickett has received numerous grants, and presented lectures, performed in theater productions, and has published essays, poems, and interviews in the Canadian Philosophical Review, Hypatia, Prairie Schooner, and the Arts Coast Journal, among many other publications. She was the host and curator of Art Laureate Conversations for Creative Pinellas and for Our Town at the Dali Museum. She also has hosted and was the producer of Art Radio in Kansas City, Missouri. Mickett currently sits on the Tarpon Springs Sustainability Board and the boards of Pinellas County Urban League and the North Pinellas Advocates for Racial Equality. Now, for Robert. Robert Stackhouse is an internationally known sculptor, painter, and printmaker. He holds an MA in art from the University of Maryland and an honorary doctorate from USF, where he was part of USF Art Department's first graduating class in 1965. Art department, right? With a background in architecture and art, Stackhouse has held endowed chairs at the University of Denver, Hartford Art School, and the Lamar Dodd School of Art at the University of Georgia. He is professor emeritus of the Corcoran College of Art, where he taught from 1966 to 1987 and oversaw their BFA program. His work can be found in museum collections around the world, including the Museum of Modern Art, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., the National Gallery of Australia, the Phillips Collection, and the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. That's just to name a few. USF's Contemporary Art Museum holds his edition print archive as well. Mickett and Stackhouse were the 2020 Creative Pinellas Art Laureates and received Creative Loafing's Best of the Bay Critic Award for science conversations they conducted during their exhibition Expanding Waters, which was held at the Creative Pinellas Galleries. They were artists at sea in 2021 aboard the Schmidt Ocean Institute's ocean research vessel Falcor, which you're going to learn a little bit more about soon. Most recently, they collaborated with choreographer Paula Kramer, dancer Helen French, and musician and composer John O'Leary for Beacon 2022. And we're honored to have Paula Kramer in the audience with us today. So be sure to say hello to her later. Now, we are incredibly fortunate to have Mickett and Stackhouse in our community here in Tarpon Springs. It is my absolute honor to introduce you to them now.
Any questions?
That'll,
Here it is. Oh, I need this. Do I need this? Can you hear me? I need this?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm Carol Mickett,
And I'm Robert Stackhouse.
and this is, you want to hold that? This is Balance of Water.
So if you've seen our exhibition, you'd think we're painters, but we do things differently too sometimes. This is a 20-ton stone that we are trying to place some securing pins into the concrete foundation to hold up a 20-ton sculpture, which is bouncing up and down, and we're putting our hands underneath it to make it work. So this is part of a 160-ton sculpture we did at the Indianapolis Michael Graves Arts Park in Indianapolis, Indiana.
So these are the standing stones of confluence. And you can see that the front standing stone mirrors the smokestack and tower of the Michael Graves building. Here's the plans for confluence. And here you can see the standing stones, which are near the road. And if you went right through the center, all the way down to the White River, you see a boat-shaped deck. And if you pick that deck up, which you couldn't, it would fit in the middle of the standing stones. And here we are working on the deck. So this is me. Robert's back here with one of our assistants. And this is what it looks like when it was done.
So originally, our intention was that because we knew we were working along the White River as the inaugural sculpture for the Michael Graves Arts Park, we thought we'd put the whole thing on the bank of the river. We knew the river overflowed in the springtime. So we had this idea of those standing stones standing up and the water of the river raging through it. That was just a great idea until the engineers said, if you do that, it's going to be so heavy that probably it'll all wash down the river. So they figured out that the deck stones, which were quite heavy themselves, wouldn't offer as much resistance because when it's overflowed, you cannot see the sculpture at all.
So when we were working on the deck, I was down there with an assistant who was a student who had just graduated from Ball State in architecture. And we were on the White River, which is, right there. And we were talking about the pre-Socratic philosophers, right? I was a philosophy professor. One of my specialties was ancient Greek philosophy. So we were talking about Heraclitus and his famous expression, you can't step into the same river twice.
So I'm just working away. I overhear them talking about that and I interject, wow, what a great concept. An artist could spend an entire lifetime trying to make that.
I, of course, having taught a million intro to philosophy classes, just rolled my eyes and we forgot about it. Until this. So this is a one room of In the Blue, which was a 4-room installation and was then the Art Center, now the Morian, in St. Petersburg.
So it's a 3-dimensional version of what it might be like to be in the water. And so in this particular case, it's very turbulent water. There's another room where it's just the framework alone without any of this other stuff, without the cacophony of wood, and it's called calm. And so we go through the various stages of water that way. And to complete the whole idea, 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, this particular painting, which is in this exhibition here, is not unlike that sculpture to us. In other words, you immerse yourself in the painting as well as you could in the sculpture.
And this, just to say, this image has been reproduced many times and is in this art history book, textbook called Gateways to Art, which we know they use at Hillsborough Community College and other colleges around, and may indeed use in this college. So we're very proud of that.
So 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional. This is a commission that we had about 5 years ago in Richmond, Virginia, and it includes a 3-dimensional stainless steel and glass sculpture in front of a mosaic on top of stainless steel lines embedded in the floor.
This is the mosaic. It's 5 panels of the rapids of the James River. So the James River comes up from the Atlantic Ocean, goes past Jamestown to these rapids. These rapids are in the center of Richmond, Virginia. So when the big ships would come up, they would encounter the rapids and couldn't go any further, so they would stop, offload. And this is a very common way that communities get founded all around the world. This is how Richmond got founded, because of those rapids. So they wanted to still go west, so they built a canal. It was surveyed by George Washington and was the first canal in the United States. Here you can see a close-up of part of the mosaic, and you can see it's very whooshy. We told the mosaicists who we worked with in Munich, Germany at Meyer Munich, that it was all supposed to sound. That's why it's called river sound song, and it was supposed to go whoosh, whoosh. And you can see how big it is when you're there. Like, this person is not short. you know, it's very big and you feel very encompassed by this water.
So Clear Passage is stainless steel and 72 pieces of glass. It's very heavy, but it was designed, as this whole project was designed, before the building was constructed. We actually worked with the design team in Chicago in their offices to produce this piece. And before this floor was even poured, before the concrete was poured, we had the foundation of the sculpture embedded in the infrastructure of the building itself. Now you can imagine all that glass up top. You want to make sure that engineering wise, it's all has its structural integrity. So the piece is boat-like, and in reference to that canal, the bateaus that went up and down the canal were one directional. They couldn't go back and forth. They had to come into what was called a turn basin and turn around, and that's where they also offloaded. This building is on top of that site. They filled it in. So this is to sort of commemorate the feelings of that, as well as maybe being in the water, as the refraction and the refractions of the glass structure.
So you can see the flow lines that we embedded in the floor. Now, if you go out the door, these flow lines actually go to the end of the curve. And if you were to follow them about a half mile, you get to these rapids. And if you get this way and follow them out to the curve and go about 3 blocks, you get to the steakhouse. And that was designed by Thomas Jefferson. I mean, it's a very well-heeled city here. And so we have the flow lines connecting the geographical reason for Richmond. Then they connect government, which organizes the city. It flows through commerce, and then is all held together by art, which is the spirit of every place.
So continuing with two-dimensional, three-dimensional, this is a very large-scale installation we did last year, and it's three-dimensional installation made out of, if you notice, two-dimensional parts. The ring itself, which is aluminum, is 12 foot tall. The paper walls are 12 foot tall. You can walk through them, see them, you can walk around them. And as you walk in through around this, you can go all the way back to the back wall with an 11-foot painting of the moon. Now, if you walk back there and you turn around and look back towards the rest of the space, you look through the curtains of the paper to the ring, and it shows the influence of the moon looking at our troubled waters.
And here's the triptych. It's out in the gallery. I guess you've all seen it. And you see in the middle, in Balance of Fire, our waters are on fire because of climate change. And you see the sperm whale fleeing because it's so hot. And there are indeed sperm whales in the Gulf of Mexico, females. And then the mighty ice tube tray coming to the rescue. So early in 2000, we moved to St. Petersburg. And I hadn't lived in Florida, so I became terrified of hurricanes. And I knew that if the waters were hot, that hurricanes would intensify. So those of you who know me, what would I do? I try to fix it. So I said, how do you cool the water? Well, you put ice cubes in it. But this is where the ice cubes all came from. So this is a map of the Tampa Bay, and you can see the barges bringing ice cubes out. But this will work because the barges are using fossil fuels, which, excuse me. Put CO2 in the atmosphere, which holds the heat. So this is meant for us to think about how can we deal with climate change and the warming of the waters.
So as artists, we take that wonderful ice cube tray and we make an icon out of it, which represents mitigation of how to maybe go about cooling the water. So another icon is the natural.
There it is.
Oh, okay. Well, we can go on to the next one. So in continuation with this theme is just making an icon out of mangroves. And mangroves are ubiquitous in the entire world, and they absorb CO2. They do so more than the Amazon rainforest, even now more so. But anyway, they store CO2, and if you cut them down, it releases them.
So the key is keep your mangroves, honor them, let them flourish because they clearly help us. Also, live oaks are great for absorbing CO2. And when their leaves move together, they cleanse the atmosphere.
You've seen this in the gallery if you've been in there. It started out, you can see it as a, well, it doesn't say it on this, but we started this in 2008 and we've painted it again just this last year. So we've gone back to the same image and modified it somewhat. It's our series of ways of depicting water. In this case, we depicted the Gulf of Mexico by showing you names of cities surrounding the Gulf of Mexico, and actually those crisscrossing lines are actually latitude and longitude. The darker blue is the Gulf Stream coming into the Gulf itself. And what the Gulf Stream does is it brings warm water into the Gulf, lets it occasionally spiral out into the Gulf Stream. And that's one aspect of this image. The other one is it could be the dynamics of what goes on in the Gulf of Mexico. It could be the weather over the Gulf of Mexico. It's a multi-layered image. So that it's a continuous spiral that goes forward and backwards, and it's never ending. So you can see, this is just a map of, I'm not supposed to say just a map. This is a map of the Gulf Stream, and you can see it's splitting out into the Gulf of Mexico.
The Gulf Stream has incredible influence over the weather of the world, and scientists are afraid that it's slowing down and hence cooling. And if it does do that, it would really be disastrous for the world. Cooling vegan. So you see this as you go into the gallery. We were asked last year, right before we went on the Falcor, to be judges for the senior show for the Magnet Art School for the county, which is located at Gibbs. And we were to give them an assignment. So we said, choose an artist from art history and assume that they're very interested in climate change and make the art that you think they would make. So we chose Monet's Water Lilies. And you can see that instead of water lilies, we put ice cubes because we would want to, as Monet would cool the waters. So Monet has nice blue waters, and we see that we have, we have water that's being very hot, and the ice cubes are cooling it. So cooling, even.
It took us 15 years to paint this too.
No, but it took Monet 15 years.
Or so. So Breath of Influence was not just a sculpture. It also became a place for performance. And in this case, it was designed for the performance of dance and of theater.
So this is a photograph by Tom Kramer, who happens to be in the audience. He's going to have a show here in next year, beginning of next year. And it was a choreograph by Paula Kramer, who's also back there. And the dance was with Helen French and CB and Rachel Lambright. And it was music composed by John O'Leary and performed by him there. It was stunning. And we all got along so well together that we did another performance. And this was at Beacon 22, which was just in April. And again, choreographed. This is a rehearsal. Choreographed by Paula Kramer, danced by Helen French, John O'Leary, composer and musician. And there we are looking at the image we're going to be using. And here's Helen dancing at the performance in the heart. And here she's emerged in the image.
Now, this is the image that you see on the background here is a print. It's Carol found it in the vaults of our prints and had immediate reaction to it to be used in this context. And it's a print of a sculpture. So it's that 2D, 3D thing again. This was a 30-foot long sculpture that you walk through, and it was done in the Biennale of Sao Paulo in Brazil. And the print then was modified for this purpose, so that you get the sense of Helen dancing into the structure, going into a 3D structure like the structure was intended, but because it's a projection, she's able to dance into the projection. And the costume was picked because of this projection as well. So she became immersed in the sculpture and then came out, but it's only a print. So we are enlarging what the experience is of the kind of art we make, and by including music and dance and projection as well, and enhancing this two-dimensional, three-dimensional way we have about looking at things.
So this is us, Artists at Sea or the Falcor from the Schmidt Ocean Institute. This was in November and December. And we were invited to be the artist to bring the Falcor, the ship, to Vigo, Spain, where it was going to be turned in for a much larger research vessel. They flew us to La Paz, Mexico. We went to the Pacific Ocean, to the Panama Canal, the Caribbean Sea, to the Atlantic, to Vigo, Spain. And this was the wet lab that got transformed into our studio.
Now, even though it's a research vessel, there were no scientists on board, which was kind of lucky for us. We didn't have to react to scientific experiments. The Ocean Institute always has artists on board with all of their different excursions. So we were fortunate enough to be brought along. But what they sort of requested was for us to commemorate the ship itself. So you see the Falcor, which is, in my opinion, a beautiful ship and really served itself well. And then the golden luck dragon, Falcor. Some of you might be familiar with the movie, The Never Ending Story. Falcor is a luck dragon, and it's very dog-like in the movie. And the dragon itself actually looks more like our dog than anything, but is gold and sort of overlapping the ship, and the signatures of the crew became part of the spirit as well of the ship. So you see again a second Falcor jumping out, that's leaping towards Falcor 2, TOO, which is what we're on a voyage to go rendezvous with.
The other thing we did while we were on the Falcor was we did our ice cube project. And you can see the ice cube paintings. So every day at 2 p.m. ship time, remember we're going through lots of time changes, a crew member, sometimes us, but it was all the crew members, each threw an ice cube into the ocean. And as they did it, they would say, cool. And we would videotape them and post it on Instagram and Facebook and do a little interview with them. And for the most part, all of them said they wanted to be on the ship. They get less money from being on a research vessel than a big commercial ship, because it was a family. and they were doing work to support the betterment of the ocean. They were amazing people. And so, sorry, wrong way. So we have this whole series of ice cube paintings that really act as a map of our trip. And we will continue the ice cube project here in Pinellas called Cooling Pinellas. And it's going to be part of the NEA grant that we were awarded through Creative Pinellas. So, full circle back to the pre-Socratics. So the first person that's called the first Western philosopher is called Thales. And he made the very brilliant statement that everything is water. And when you think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense. And we, of course, embrace this. And we know about it mostly through Aristotle and metaphysics.
So coming all the way back to just the announcement for this is the spiral in that painting is never ending. It's a continuity. It's a continuous form of dynamics that becomes the stuff of which we can wonder whether that can become art or not, and whether we're going to strive on as artists and human beings in this world where we have the possibility that not everything is water.
We hope not everything's water. We do want to keep our land. So now we're going to turn this back to Christine. And thank you for sitting through our presentation.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. I just could sit and listen to you all day. I'm gonna swing over here, and we have part of the program is that we will we have a few conversational questions, things that I personally was curious about and thought other people would be curious about, and so we're just going to talk about that a little bit and open it up for questions and answers with the audience. So if you can bear with us a little, I can come over here to you guys.
Robert's going to sit down.
It's the weeks for a long afternoon. First, I want to ask you guys about your collaboration, which I think is pretty magical. You have this great synergy in your collaboration, and trust must play a big role in what you do. How has your creative journey individually influenced your collaboration? Like, what is it that each of you bring to the table?
Well, I mean, I, of course, bring all of my background in performance and philosophy and making art. And it was the case when we first started collaborating, there wasn't much trust because we really hadn't worked together. And it was fairly explosive because it is the case when you collaborate, you have a lot at stake. You have your reputation, and we each had reputations. And we had to learn to trust each other. Now, of course, we do. But in any relationship, it doesn't matter what it is. You have to gain trust. And there's always at the beginning a sense of, is this a good idea? Well, it turns out it was a great idea. So,
Well, I think it's a little bit different for me. I lived in New York City for 20 some odd years and did a lot of really large scale sculpture around the country and international. And my studio wasn't much bigger than this, in fact, about half the size of this. So I couldn't build the sculptures there. I had to build them on site. And so I had to collaborate with somebody on the other end. We had to order all the materials, get a work plan together, get volunteers together. Then I had to do the drawings and imagine what would go on, how to schedule it, show up, and the next day, the teacher would come and photographs of us unloading the truck, and then that would be it for me. And then we would build the sculpture in about 7 days or 10 days. I'd hop on a plane, fly home, and never see it again. Now that was a way of really learning how to collaborate with other people. And then the other thing was that I started being invited to do work with master printers in print world. And that's a major collaborative effort as well. I mean, master printers just reproducing my art. And I'm doing exactly what that print studio wants me to do. So it's a collaboration between the two. So I was a little bit more used to that aspect of it. However, we still got into big fights with Westwood as I did just after we got married. As a matter of fact, I have to say that our longtime and trusted studio assistant, Thaddeus Root, who some of you might know, he answered once when somebody said, "What are they like when they start collaborating?" And he said, "I don't know. I always do things."
And now Thaddeus collaborates with Desmond Clark, and we laugh at them because they act just like we did.
Do you guys leave the room when they?
No, they amuse us.
Well, that actually brings of course, you probably have answered half of the questions that I already were going to ask you, but that does bring me around to your artistic process and your technique. What is usually the catalyst of how you start a work? What sparks that idea, or does it come from somewhere? Like if it's like something out of philosophy, or is it more of a continuation of your the projects that you're working on with water?
I think it depends upon the project. So, so for Cooling Giverny, we looked through our history books. You know, we know our history, but it was like, okay, let's see what we want an artist from art history. Let's look, and then I think it was Robert. He said, "Let's do the water lilies." And I was like, "Yeah, brilliant. Let's do that." Sometimes I'll have an idea, and sometimes Robert will, but oftentimes in a big project, we sit down and we talk, we write notes, we just keep, you know, thinking about it. With respect to the Last Dance project, using that print, we were stymied. We didn't know what to do because we couldn't really do a structure because it was a performance. And there were lots of performance, other people performing. Why, I don't know, because what Paul was doing was so brilliant. But it was like, what are we going to do? And this print, which Robert had done years ago, I think that maybe I'd seen it 3 times in my life. I woke up one morning from a dream and I said to Robert, I know exactly what we're going to do. Here's it. We're going to find that print. That's it. And it worked. So who knows?
I think our backgrounds sort of indicate a lot about us. I mean, Carol really uses her mental capacities and creative capacities that way. She can structure things. I tend to go a little bit linear in that I sort of operate off of a sense of a body of work that I try to find a connection to what we do today, right now, with what I did in the 70s or the 60s. And that's a continuous thread that runs through. Now, since we've started collaborating, I have to say that most of the starting concepts and the detail to that has come from Curator. And she quite often will, probably a little bit too much about this, but we don't like to tell anybody what we do. Who does what. But I think she's really good at coming up with things that are related, as I just said. I mean, they're based on our body of work. But she could come from this side and that side, because she's trained to do that. And what I'm doing is I'm just trying to make sense of how, like when I said, wow, an artist could spend a lifetime trying to make that. I mean, my thing was, you can't make it. It's impossible to make that thing. And that's what was exciting about it. Because you can try to make it, and what comes out of that is wondrous things. So that's one of the, I think, my philosophy of art a lot is that just because it's not possible to do doesn't mean it's not worth trying. And as an artist, those kind of attempts, that's where your creativity comes from. By doing that, you're not doing the normal same thing.
There's certainly a difference between our three-dimensional work and our two-dimensional work. I mean, when you build a sculpture, like one of those big things, you've got real practical concerns, right? It's got to stand up, it can't hurt anybody, it's got to be embedded in the ground, those big standing stones. When we put that big standing stone in, right, we had these stainless steel pillars, and the crane guy had to put it down, and we had to put these shims in and all of this. And they were having a meeting with all the engineers for the park because they were building the park. And they were standing around betting that it wasn't going to go down. It went down the first time. And the head engineer had really come to like us. And he was so proud because his hands were under there with ours, as well as the assistant to the crane operator that had fingers missing on his left hand. So we were like,
I think want to relate one other thing about where some of this inspiration comes from, where our thoughts come from. We got a call from our Chicago art dealer saying that the arts park wanted to commission us to do a sculpture as the inaugural sculpture for the Michael Graves Arts Park, and said, so they want a big permanent sculpture outdoors. So you got any idea what you want to work with? And we immediately said Indiana limestone. So there was a pause on the other end. This is our art dealer. He knows us. Have you ever worked in stone before? No, but what does that mean? So we're there, and at Indianapolis, we go and we pick out all the stuff. We go around to all the quarries, most of them underground, by the way.
fabulous.
Which is amazing. There's cows up on top of the grass, but they're all down underneath.
With robots cutting
Robots cutting stuff. So anyway, we get a lot of that stone in kind, as different kind, because they're kind of the dregs of the industry. I mean, they're cutting architectural stone, and they some of the stuff is rough on one side and very flat on the other side. And so we were standing there one day, and we were talking about, the trucks were arriving. That 20-ton stone arrived on its own truck. When the forklifts picked it up and moved it off, the forklifts moved it funny, because the 20 tons was just more than those two forklifts. Carol and I looked at each other, and all these stones were unloaded. This stone's supposed to be vertical, and they lie it down on the ground. All right, now how are we going to get it up? Well, we knew that we had equipment at the right, but not right away. So we sort of had to carve that stone standing like this, looking at it sideways. But we said, oh my goodness, what did we get ourselves into? And some of the people that were volunteering with us were kind of freezing us in a way, because they wanted to know what it was going to look like when we were finished. And they tried saying, well, you can use this grid on it to make it this kind of surface. You can use this one to make it more porous, or we can do this other thing, things that they knew. And we said, well, we'll let the stone talk to us. We'll figure it out. So they were quite concerned with us doing a 160-ton sculpture, and we've never carved stone before. So we took a real crash course in carving stone. And then the newspaper put out a call for volunteers. We got 45 people volunteering to come out and help carve. They didn't know anything about it either. So we got a lot out of it. Carol was really instrumental because a lot of the people that came out were women. And we worked mostly with a mallet and a chisel.
It was really great. So many volunteers. And so one woman, one of the smaller stones, that was her stone. You were not allowed to touch it. And she went away for a week. She said, don't let anyone touch my stone. Okay. And it was, we had one gentleman come, older gentleman. He came with a bucket and he said, you know, my wife thinks I'm crazy, but I didn't think I'd ever be able to work on a stone sculpture. So he came with a bucket and every day he came and cleaned up all the shards every day. And it was, he was so happy that he got to work on a sculpture. And so we had big celebration afterwards. And we tend to do that with our big sculptures. We include the community because it's their sculpture, really. I mean, we aren't going to be around except for the building of it.
I know, that's incredible though. That,
Oh, plus our dogs were there.
that's always I have a couple more questions. I know we'll probably be running over time, but because we want to make sure that you are able to ask questions too. But I had a couple of points I wanted to make. With your influences, we're talking about cooling Giverny, which introduces the exhibition, and it's a great art historical reference that links Abraham Raptner, Claude Monet, and the art of today, which is an incredible full circle moment. When you know, as you find, I'm sure you've seen, we have a picture of Abraham Raptner in Giverny in 1920 as a young man when he lived next door to Monet and would watch him paint from the sidelines, and he would work on his waterways. It's interesting to think how artists from 100 years ago would interpret our world today and what their art would look like. Who were, if you were transported back to 1920s, what would your art look like?
Well, if I were transported back to the 1920s, my art probably wouldn't look like much of anything because women weren't really doing art. So odds are that Robert would be, but I wouldn't. But I'd say probably my biggest influence as a young artist was Louise Nevelson, who I saw as an undergraduate come, and Louise Nevelson's a sculptor. And I was at the University of New Hampshire. June Kaneko was my teacher. And he had invited Louise because she lived in New Hampshire. And she came in and she had these three gorgeous guys following her very young. And I said, that's it. I also just admire her work so much. I mean, when you think of her work, right, I did a lot of mathematical logic and mathematics, and her work is very systematic and precise, and so that work spoke to me so much, but she spoke to me as well.
Well, it's actually, Carol answered, because the other question was going to be what were some of your influences, but if you could envision yourself being transported to the 1920s, what would you be working on and who would be some of your influences?
Well, you know, probably the most influential person for me as an artist would have been Leonardo, just because of his codex. I mean, just insatiable about finding out. Not that I am, but I just found that stuff fascinating. I think it just, the sense of our history is really much more than I would have probably found myself being immersed in whatever they were doing. Probably one thing I noticed and I really liked when I started looking at our history myself outside of our history classes I looked at an artist I liked, and then looked at who that artist liked, and then who that artist liked, and then go backwards. And so I put myself back in the 20s. I put myself in, there's really a lot of stuff going on, a lot of major changes into what art could be. I don't know whether I would be privy to that because we were pretty people that were getting that kind of information. So I think, I probably, the way I started out my life as an artist, I was pretty traditional, but then pretty quickly along the line, I decided that everything I did belonged to somebody else. And then I switched from being a painter to a sculptor because I didn't know anything about sculpture. Therefore, anything I did would have been mine, out of ignorance, not out of brilliance or anything like that. But the ignorance about it, sort of took the inhibitors out of it. And I was able to just make my own mistakes, repeat history over and over again, but do it in such a way that I felt I was doing it. Taught myself how to do watercolor, which I don't see too many examples of, but most of my pre-Carol career, BC, I did large scale 10-foot by 20-foot watercolor paintings. And my medium was watercolor, which looked like oil, it didn't look like watercolor, but what I liked about it was once it was dry, you could wet it again and put it all over again. So you could just continuously work on it. So I would probably be more interested in some of the technical aspects of things. I have no real favorite artist back then, but I really wanted to.
Well, that brings me to the future, and building off of the past. You have this unique visual language of art that draws from the well of ancient philosophers, historical figures, architecture, science, performance, and theater. You take hundreds of years of human exploration and distill that into this universal language that communicates the issues of today. And especially through, and this is a perfect example with the symbols that you have that are metaphor, and then you incorporate experience to that. It seems that this visual language, especially with your sort of symbolic iconography, is timeless, very much like I think back on ancient pictographs and murals in caves and all the way back. Looking ahead 100 years, how do you see your work being interpreted by other artists?
Well, I suspect in 100 years, just like there probably won't be any books, there probably won't be any art, probably no museums. I think that the work, like enrichment in that building, will probably still be there. And I hope that people will still be enjoying it. And I mean, it's hard to know. I mean, technology moves so quickly, and painting, however wonderful it isn't really so much a 21st century meaning. So who knows in 100 years how people will be making art. And I hope that it's documented and people see it. And I hope they love it and they think that it's the best thing that they've ever seen. But then every artist thinks that and wants that. So I don't know. I think that's a hard thing. I mean, we think often, what's going to happen in a year or 5 years? What are we going to do? What materials can we use? And we're stymied by materials for sculpture because since we're working in issues of climate change, we were really pressed about using that aluminum, because to make aluminum, you have to use fossil fuels. And I mean, we tried to get recycled aluminum. So, I mean, people, I think, are going to be really thinking about what materials are you using, even with canvas and paint and all types of things, making the screws to put your frames together. Stretchers. So, I mean, things are very different. And who knows?
Well, I'm going to use the body of our work. And somehow or another, I mean, we do have a few foundations, we do have a few collections of multiple pieces, up to 100 pieces. The University of South Florida owns 70 some odd pieces. So they're there, they're in place. And so probably in 100 years, like somebody studies age of Egypt, they might study age of Egypt. And somebody might find it, and if they're on, there's a bunch of them in one place that might compare them and look at it. But I like to think that another artist, upon seeing our work 100 years from now, would sort of get the feeling that we had a sense of who we were based on where we've been and where we thought we were going to go. So that the body of work would have shown that as the life of an artist. And you can, you mentioned timeless. And I think that's a timeless kind of thing. You can look at a lot of different epochs of history and think that there was, that life lived. And that's all that this is. There's a painting that I did before. Carol shows the top of the ocean and where the ship is supposed to be. It's not there. It's just the weight of the ship going back into the ocean. And that's basically a morality painting. It's who I was, and I sort of made this kerfuffle, with the bow weight, and then it sort of filtered back into the universe. And so, but that painting is there, and that painting could be interpreted that way, or somebody completely different than I did. Who was it? Arthur Dante said, never paying attention to the intentions of the artist. So that, and it's probably true, because we intend what we want when we look at it.
I think that brings it to a good point, that just making one last point, that your work is also, you have the physical object, and in the future, this documentation is so important, but there's also an ephemeral side to your work that is working with the community and doing the participatory side of it and the collaborative side of it. Like working with the crew in the Falcor, who they weren't artists, you were involving them in your process, and then you forever influenced them in a way to think about things differently. And I think that's pretty infectious the more you work with people, and your ideas kind of spread through the community, and other people think about what you're doing. And this, in your case, is sort of the catalyst of raising awareness of climate change. In our exhibition, just as a side note, this Gulf Stream, which is this blue ribbon right here, is a way for visitors in the footprint of the exhibition to become a part of the Gulf Stream and kind of travel through the exhibition as it winds around the galleries, and it ends up winding back towards the equator. And you just we weren't able to do a sculptural, big, fancy installation, but in our own quiet way, we wanted to make sure people had that experience by giving them a space to meditate, which is in the center gallery with the Greek text. But also, as you exit that gallery, most museums have you exiting through a gift shop. We have you exiting through what you see if climate change pushes us to the brink, and you're forced to be confronted by this flaming water and what's happening to this poor whale that that Carol's been so protective of. And it really, hopefully that touches you on an emotional level, and helps you, walk away and try to make something of that and take some action for yourself. So we hope that that ephemeral experience will become something that influences you all. With that, if you guys are still willing to sit with us, and if you have any questions, we're happy to to bring the microphone to you. If you want the microphone, Sherry?
No, I can talk loud enough. It's interesting that when I got home last night from the Dawson tour for the collection, the National Geographic copy arrived. There's 2 articles in here that pertain specifically to this exhibition. And undersea splendor under stress, and they are addressing the warming climate around the Philippine Islands. The other one has to do with fishermen, having to do with trout, that their waters are changing. So my question is, we still have doubters that do not believe that climate change is happening. And we have, as human beings, tried to address it in several different ways, through art, through magazines, through books. How do we break through and get our governments to do something? The younger people got together, and I had a lot of hope that they were going to succeed. But that seems to have petered out too.
So I think that we just keep doing what we're doing. But I think we see in local governments, people doing things, addressing the issues about here in Tarpon, sea level rise. I mean, everybody knows it. We've got those king tides that, you know, come over all our docks and flood our streets. And the local government is really addressing those things, changing out the septic tanks and getting rid of them because they're flooding, and everything that's in them goes into our water. We're really trying to address the issue about red tide and so on. And I think it really is the local governments that are doing the heavy lifting now. We see a huge push to thinking about cars differently, electric cars and maybe hydrogen cars. I mean, we have an electric car. I sat on the sustainability committee and I felt guilty driving a car with gas, so we got rid of it. So I think that those things work on us individually, and I think locally is the thing to do. Local is always the thing to do. And I think that when we do it locally, it, instead of trickle down, sort of trickles up. And I think that's the most we can do. Elect people, vote for people who get it, and unify ourselves with that. I mean, one of the things that also is significant are the epidemics like COVID. We're getting more and more of that because of climate change, because animals are being pushed in and animals are transferring viruses to humans. That's all because of the changing in the environment. So at some point, there's going to be a tipping point where it's going to become clear and people are going to en masse. But now we just each have to keep doing our bits. Thinking about solar, thinking about planting trees and keeping your mangroves. And hey, throw an ice cube in the water.
Those for saltwater ice cubes, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Brought that up to us sometime. We're putting more water in the ocean, making the waters rise. But the research vessels have spigots that are just nothing but salt water, because research vessels are their own universe. They make everything on board those ships, and they even have that 3D printed ships. But I think one thing too about the alarm of the oceans is we know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the bottom of our own ocean. And it's very difficult to get to, it's very expensive to get to.
And it's just not part of their imagination because we can't see it. We can look at the telescope and see Mars. We can't look down and see sea dump that's 15 miles down below. It's not supposed to have any life around it, but has life that's not life like we know. And this is what these ships have discovered. And there's a lot of them out there, but their discoveries are so pinpointed in what they're looking at. Scientists like to study one of the key microbes for the rest of their life, and not the bigger general picture. But I think the awareness of the ocean, the awareness of the environment, things like that, it's not that long. I mean, I remember when I was very young, we didn't have these words, but we have now to pick the environment. I live in Florida. What's a hurricane's on us? We didn't know a hurricane was coming. It just happened, ducks and those things. And well, that was a good one. So we can forecast it, we can see it now, but what in a lifetime? And in a lifetime, the information of the vastness of the ocean, we learn through working with scientists that they don't have a Atlantic Ocean, a Pacific Ocean. It's the ocean. It's just like the air over the United States is not the United States air, and the air over Mexico is not Mexican air. So those are distinctions that we have to sort of get a little bit more used to. The ocean is the ocean. The Gulf of Mexico is the ocean. Tampa Bay is the ocean. They're all the same. It's all the same thing. And how we address it is something that's going to take generations, I think. It has to get worse for it to get better. I think that's what happens to get people to pay attention to it. We don't know any more than really anybody else. We know just very few things. The way we get a little bit more information is what Carol does. She did this at Pinellas last year with the expanding water. She had how many panels of scientific experts talking about this relationship to art. And that's how you deliver it out. It doesn't have to be delivered as scientists, scientific information out to people. It can come through the world of art. It can come through the world of music or other kinds of human endeavors.
That's spot on. And I think, through alternative ways of learning, like through experience and creative experiences, is a great way to educate people. And that's why we try to present sort of the scientific side of that in the exhibition through little interactive components here and there. I also think, until it hits someone's pocketbook or affects their life personally, you're not really going to, really take it seriously. And it's starting to happen. I mean, even the war that's happening right now between Russia and Ukraine is spurring more oil drilling and causing more carbon emissions more than ever because of, there's a crisis with the oil and it's affecting our pocketbooks. And so it's a cycle that is going to keep going. And I think people are starting to take notice of that. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah.
What was the prompt for you guys to collaborate together?
We were both living in Kansas City. I had a radio show called Art Radio, where I interviewed artists. It was an hour show. I did, plays. I did poetry reading. I had all the arts, music, everything. And I learned that Robert was part of a foundation and actually had a studio here. And I knew of him when I lived in Minneapolis. He did a show at the Walker Art Center, and I remember going to it. So I knew who Robert Stackhouse was. And I said, well, I'm going to interview him. So he was on my show. And then, and it was a great interview. And then his foundation, I don't know, 6-8 months later, hired me to make a movie about him. So I made a movie about it. It was called Robert Stackhouse, an Artist at Work, and it won a prize, and all this stuff. It was Robert's life in 10 minutes. See, that's all you needed. And,
Could have given me 12.
and then we started working on paintings together. And we just decided to collaborate. What happened was we went to, you received the endowed chair at University of Georgia. And so there was am I going to go? Am I not going to go? So we went, we got married. And then when we moved to St. Pete, I was asked to go to New York and do a documentary on some ballet dancers. And we had just got married, and it was like, okay, if I go do that, I'm like gone, right? I'll be in New York for a year or more. And so at that point, it was, okay, if we're going to collaborate, let's make it official and actually do it. And so we chose to do that.
We're glad you did. That's amazing. Did we have any other questions?
You had mentioned that you wanted to make your own art, and so you kind of did a whole new, you went to art school, learned, and then you wanted to do your own thing, is that right?
Well, sort of, yes. I mean, I was taught very well how to paint. Oil and we really experimented with acrylic. It's back then, Petersburg and buy acrylic. Buy a vat of polymer, something like that too. You make your own acrylic paint. So, but we did that. We learned how to use it and learned the ill effects of it, just like the ill effects of oil. So, I knew how to do all that stuff, and I was trained well enough to say, all right, I can teach myself on that. And so I did that, and you see in here that some of these big paintings, by the way, are on paper that are being mounted on canvas. I taught myself how to do that, and I've had many times with people in audiences like this ask me, how do you do that? And I said, I failed 3 times. And they said, but yeah, but how did you do it? I said, I failed 3 times. So that was my answer to it. I mean, I failed 3 times. I did it wrong 3 times, and the 4th time it worked. And there was no rhyme or reason for it other than that. And that's how I learned how to do watercolor. But I have to say, I already knew how to make art. I knew how to go from here to there to make it look good or to make it look like something. I understood the techniques, but I knew the history of it. So it was something that I was pretty confident about, and I was kind of surprised to fail at this to figure it out. I thought, you just put the paper on a piece of canvas and look how hard it is. You should have seen the mess it made. And these paintings were watercolor paintings before they were mounted on canvas, so I had to teach myself that too. And I also taught myself watercolor is not fragile like everybody thinks it is. The way you do it theoretically is you saturate the paper with water, and then you flip it upside down, you put it on the canvas, and then you weigh it down with something, and then you pull away, forget about it, even though it's got bubbles and wrinkles in it. So that's
So what was the desire for experimentation unknown?
yes, and that's what a studio is for.
Yeah.
It's not a place where you make masterpieces. That's where you make a lot of messes, and then out of that can come stuff. And, that's how you move along. You get yourself in trouble. Maybe I'm fortunate. I was taught to be an abstract expressionist, right? And the mantra then, or the philosophy of being an abstract painter. I remember Harrison Covington over at USF telling me this: make a mess and then figure out how to get out of it. That's what abstract expressionism was to me. It was gestural, it was action, it was athletic, it was games, all that kind of stuff. And but you had to sort of make something out of it. Something had to happen that here's a word that I haven't used long. We solve resolve the image. And that was kind of the language at the time, like a mess to resolve it. So I was never very good at that. So my paintings were always pretty much representation of the abstract sculptures I did, but kind of literal paintings. So I found out that I was a little bit more if I could see it, I could paint it. Kind of a way of doing things, but I did abstract sculptures. So my paintings, like that red image there, is very abstract, but it's a very literal painting of that abstract sculpture. Literal thing. Right. So you can see, I just one other thing. You can see where Carol and I can really collaborate in this way. And she can.
What, I can hold the microphone.
She can present these issues and then we have a response, call and response and stuff like that. That works, it doesn't work, all that stuff.
That's true.
That's where we go. We usually end up doing it her way.
That's true.
I think Barbara has a question.
Wait, I think that's pretty well. And it doesn't here, this is a daunting experience for us. I don't know how to get through our church because there's so much information. We'll try to do it.
Thank you.
And I wanted to say that what is the network of connections? And we connected to Abraham Raptner. That is, I think, that is opportunity to go to become an art student. And he was a student at Northwestern University. We go around the corner to Harvard. There, we decided to go into art as a career.
I did not
And
know
when
that.
Michael, I might be able to add something to that. Are you connected to me?
Well, here's another connection. Fall, we're going up to George Washington University to do a project in the courtroom. So it's going around all over the place.
So I would just like to say that since no one else has a question, Robert and I have gotten this NEA grant administered by Creative Pinellas called Cooling Pinellas. And it's part of our Ice Cube project. And we're going to be doing it in Tarpon, Dunedin, and St. Pete. And it's a whole project about collecting salt water and making an ice cube. And then it's just a short version, I'm telling you. Then we gather together and we go out in kayaks. And we all have our ice cubes with us and we throw them in the ocean. Of course, you have to say cool, maybe you'll get a sticker. And we'll have t-shirts and all of this. And we'll videotape it. There'll be things about mangroves and climate change. And then at the end, thanks to Noelle Smith, who will be a curator of this, there will be a show at Fairgrounds in the new V.V. Dimmitt Gallery Wild Space. And all of this will be exhibited with some other paintings of ours about the Ice Cube project and climate change. So if you would like to participate in this and be one of the Ice Cube people and kayak people, you can come up and put your name, email, and phone number here. Make sure you put in where you live. So CJ just put her hand up and she lives in St. Pete. So CJ will travel. Well, there's going to be Todd and Terry, we hope, are going to be the managers in St. Pete. We're going to have managers in all places. So it's a big community engagement piece to connect the county and each community and to think about climate change and what to do, but also, it's fun and science should be fun and engagement should be fun and thinking about how to save our world can be fun. And the more fun it is, the more we get done. So I invite you to participate.
Anyway, watch out for it.
Yeah.
It's coming.
And just so you know that the executive director of Creative Pinellas is in that pink shirt there. Oh, pink shirt, Barbara St. Clair. Curator Noel Smith is here. So there's CJ, the executive director of American Stage. So there's always celebrities here. And there's all sorts of people here. So thank you for coming. We're honored that you all are here.
No, thank you. Thank you for.
I want to thank you, Carol and Robert. That was an incredible talk, and I think we've all learned a lot. And thank you very much for attending. Nice to know we have so many superstars in the audience today. I want you to just please continue to check the Libra Raptner website, which is libraratner.org, and follow us on Facebook. We do have a series of things happening throughout the summer. We have a second installation of our Florida Waterways exhibition, which features our Works on Paper gallery, which includes a Clyde Butcher photograph from the collection and some other photographs. And then with that, in July 21st, we're going to have a wonderful talk on Florida's interior waterways, which Carol will be hosting along with Mallory Dimmitt, who is the CEO of the Florida Wildlife Corridor Coalition. So that ties in nicely with some of the interior waters photography that will be in the Works on Paper exhibition. So we will be adding things, hopefully some nature hikes at Broker Creek Preserve and other things like that. So please check back often. And Balance of Water will be on view through August 27th, so you have plenty of time to come back. So thank you so much. We appreciate you being with us today, and thank you, Robert and Carol.
Okay.